Welcome, everyone. I'm David Johnson. I'm the CEO of Ms. Kendra Programs and your host today in our webinar series. And I have with me Dr. Hadar Lubin, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Ms. Kendra Programs and a frequent attendee of these meetings. And I'm very pleased to introduce the Honorable Tony Harp, who was a state legislator and senator from Connecticut for over 30 years, and then served as New Haven's first female and second African-American mayor in the over 300 years of our history. And Tony took upon herself to really prioritize youth, socio-emotional learning, education in the schools, and as well as trying to bring down the crime rate and doing other things, and did a very fine job with all of that. We're very pleased to have you joining us, Tony.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that as we go through this program, if you have any questions, please make sure to put those into the Q&A box. Our webmaster, Jillian Mattern, is going to be collating those. And then about halfway through the program, we'll be pitching those questions to us on the panel. So with all of that, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Lubin, who's going to start us off on the topic of recovery is not linear.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So good to be with you wherever you are. And those of you coming back, welcome back. Those of you joining us today for the first time, great to have you with us. And we're talking today about the nature of the recovery process. And we all very much familiar with the recovery. We all maybe had to recover from an illness, maybe we had to recover from an injury, maybe from an operation or surgery that you underwent. And we know that actually the recovery process itself is never the way it is being predicted to be. And we are currently experiencing the nature of the recovery from COVID and from the pandemic. And we already been witness to the fact that it's not a linear process. As much as we would like that the recovery will be linear in its nature, you have a starting point, you understand what you need to do, you do it, you get to the end point, which is point B. And there is a straight line that really depicts your journey. Likewise, as you convene back at the school, you are still in the recovery process from the pandemic, you start a new year, and you find yourself with the hope that, yes, if I will prepare for my class, I'll be ready with my curriculum, I'll teach the class, the student will learn, and the objectives will be met. A linear recovery is desired because it's clear, it's progressive, it has a very clear direction, and it's very predictable. And we like that. It's comforting to know that that's the way it should be. However, it's not the way it is, as we know. The recovery is what we call a sinus shaped curves. It has a lot of ups and a lot of downs. It's not straight line. And some people speak about it, you go 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And there is a sense when you go down in that sinus curves of ups and down that you're actually going backward. But actually you're going forward in a different way. It has this just different shape to it. And you probably already know that because you come to the class, and yes, you did prepare for the class. And in the middle of the class of your lesson, you need to shift gears as your kids are struggling with the masks, or somebody gets very anxious or distressed about something that had happened the night before, and you're unable to achieve the objective of the day. The recovery process, and therefore how school looks like and the teaching looks like, can be and will be bumpy and fluctuating and sometimes unpredictable. But even though it is not linear and it's not a straight curve, and it has this nature of a roller coaster ride, it is important to know that despite all of it, it's actually going forward. It's also progressive and it's also purposeful. It just has a different nature to it. Therefore, it's important to expect there will be downs and to embrace the ups. But most importantly, and I think this is probably the hardest thing to do, is to know that with the downs, you are progressing forward. And knowing that really gives you an extra cushion to tolerate that bumpy ride, if you will. So we quite often think about the recovery as a process that you need, because that it is so bumpy and the road may be filled with potholes. Then put the seatbelt on, and this is the proverbial seatbelt, where you really view the seatbelt as the support that is needed for this process. Be flexible with your expectations. You may have to change course a little bit, maybe a little bit more forgiving of yourself when you feel so disappointed something didn't work the way it is or the way it was supposed to be. And most importantly, just remind yourself of that it is a bumpy road. Educate other people, your co-workers, people you interact with, that recovery is never linear, but it can be bringing us to the finish line as well. So let me stop here and open it to our panel.
Well, I had a principal just this last week tell me that she told all of her teachers that the kids who are now in third grade were in first grade when the pandemic began, and to treat them all as if they're second graders. And because last year was so disrupted. And I initially took that as being very wise, which is it's a recognition of what's happened. But it hit me later as I was traveling back from the school. What does that mean? Because we have every student from K through 12 last year. Are they all now 1 year behind? And what do we do with a third grader that we're viewing as second graders when I've got a third grade curriculum to teach? And am I going to teach that third grade curriculum kind of like, we got to move forward here? We can't have everyone doing last year's curriculum. Or what are we going to do about that? I had another principal say that they were not going to be focusing on academics immediately, that literally getting the kids back into school, focusing on the socio-emotional learning, the milieu, the routines of the school was the most important thing. And that seemed to me also very wise. But then I realized, like, if I was a teacher, at some point, the pandemic is going to be over, and we're going to be left trying to recover and to get back to where we were. And I think that's going to be really, really challenging. And not to mention the fact that in any given year, there's a pretty broad variation within second graders, within fifth graders, of students that are doing very, very well and others that are struggling. And I think that the variation has increased as a result of the pandemic, where some kids got very little stimulation, maybe in households that are less resourced, where essentially they did not do much homework at all. And others may have been given, working with their parents, they could have been given extra supports, et cetera. So that actually those third or fifth or seventh graders coming back to school are going to be at a broader level of variation. And I wonder, because there have been several schools we've worked in which have now instituted these blended classrooms, like a combined third, fourth grade, a combined fourth, fifth grade, which is basically designed to try to capture the variation in development and academics within a same age group of kids. That literally, I could be in third grade technically, but I'm going to be kind of exposed to part of the fourth grade curriculum, et cetera. And I was kind of wondering, whether we may see more of that in the next year or so, where schools are going to try to merge more of these things to allow students to move where they need to move or not. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some aspects of this trauma, of this stress on our society that are unique. And I think as Tony knows, even more than we do in terms of looking at it from the point of view of a state level or city level, adapting to change. There's all this excitement around the actual traumatic event itself. Think Sandy Hook, 9/11, whatever. But the recovery takes a long time. And once we think we're past it, actually we're in the recovery period, but we're no longer highlighting it. And so it tends to basically, people start to forget, and then they just start assuming that everything is going to be sort of moving along. Meanwhile, you've got a certain group of kids that have really been harmed by the pandemic and that need extra help and are going to be kind of left behind. So while I agree with the general sense of optimism that you were talking about, in terms of it's not going to look very smooth, but it is moving forward, and I do agree with that. I wonder if it's going to be moving forward in the same amount for different kids or not, and that's going to, and how do we address that? How does a school system, how does a city, address that? So,
I think that one of the things that is required of us is this whole sense of creativity. It can't be the way that it's always been, and we can't use the structures that we've always used. And so we've got to find a way, I believe, to reach out to those around us, other teachers, administrators, policymakers, to help them see that we've got to create something new before we actually escape recovery. But it's a great opportunity, I believe, for creativity and for coming together to come up with new solutions for those very kids that were going to have difficulty anyway. Now there are more of them. And so maybe there'll be more of a spotlight on kids that are struggling, because so many of them probably will be during this time.
I mean, how do you think? I mean, that totally, I agree with that completely. And the thing is, how do you balance, or what do you do in terms of policy or intervention to support the creative ideas at a time when people are probably feeling like, well, we better get back to our standard routines? In other words, too much creativity brings in too much variation, too much uncertainty. You can't, in other words, if I'm a school board person, do we want one school to be doing this and another school to be doing that? So I would assume there's pressure to standardize, and yet how do you work that so it doesn't crush the kind of creative and spontaneous efforts that have to happen?
When I think about the standards, oftentimes they are set and that you have to meet them. And if by doing what we've always done means that we're not going to meet those standards, that sort of puts pressure to do something different and to create something new. And somebody's got to be able to communicate that and articulate it and feel empowered to do that. And I think that might also be another place where there's going to be a bit of a struggle. But the truth of the matter is that the old standards will not work in this recovery.
I think in addition, I just want to add another dimension to the kind of variability that we should expect when we think about recovery as as an entity, that there will be a space that we enter that we call recovery. There is another dimension, which is, of course, there will be a huge gradient in students' ability to study because, as David, you said, and as we know, there is quite a bit of variability without pandemic. But with the disruption in the structures that known to be very supportive for kids, for their development and learning, not having the schools for a long time, having it in a way that is very foreign to the teachers and the students, there is definitely more variability about the learning, but there is another dimension of variability, which is how a person responds to such a stressful situation. Some kids will come and they may receive a lot of support in tutoring and studying, and they will be up to par with the studies, but they got so rusty in their social capacity and not being able to adapt to the demand of a full class. And other kids who may not have the resources to get, maybe I'm very simplistic about it, but just to make the point, they may not have a lot of resource to keep with the academics, have an extended family that came together, had a lot of positive experience at times, assuming there was no illness and death in the family, and they come and they are very ready to be in the social setting. And of course, there is a variability about how any given child, a given person,
Right.
teachers included, are dealing with the fear of this very frightening virus that is not only about our health, but it's our economic and our ability to be in the world in a safe way.
Yeah. I mean, that's very, very important point, which is there is no one recovery.
Right.
Each person's recovering in a completely different way. And I know myself, I keep asking, and I've been asked, over and over again, like, what is the pandemic? What is the effect of it on kids? And, I tell kind of a story or a variety of stories about it. And I think everyone's been doing that in terms of trying to understand what has happened. For some people, it has really kind of broken a lot of social bonds. For other people, it's actually supported them in a certain way in terms of being at home, been closer to family. I mean, all these different stories. I think one thing we should really be careful about is not trying to land on one or two or three stories about the pandemic, because you then apply that and then you think, okay, we've got a plan, let's do it, as opposed to, a principle we follow in the Miss Kendra program, which is you have to ask every child
Mhm.
what your situation is. And, I was just in a school, we were doing a training a couple days ago, and all these cute kids were coming with their masks and down the thing looking great. And, a number of the teachers were thrilled that it looked like we were all back in line and the kids are going to school and the whole thing. But the kids are not broadcasting the unique aspects of what they went through. And so it's so easy to kind of, if they seem to be okay, is to think that they're okay and then not ask them, so that then you don't really know how to address some of their particular needs. So I think it's very, very important not to kind of conclude some generalized understanding. And unfortunately, webinars like this tend to do that. We tend to give our advice, and then that seems to make sense, and then somebody is going to go, well, that's what we should do. So we need to really remind people that each kid may have gone through a very unique situation where coming back to school is a delight or coming back to school is a burden. And whatever schools and teachers can do to find time to get to each kid and to kind of make an assessment, I think that's really important.
I think it's important too. And I think that sometimes what we bring is what our experience has been. And so as a result, we just assume, well, it probably was much like it was for my children. And, you know, one of the things that hit me was that, particularly for urban schools, that oftentimes the parents in urban schools, they were the ones going to work every day. They weren't at home with their kids. There were so many professional families. They were at home, and you see these things on television with them doing work on Zoom. Well, for urban poor families, that's not what happened. They had to work sometimes 2 and 3 jobs. And the real question becomes, what happened to that child? Was that child supervised? Wasn't that child supervised? Did that child actually have access to food and other kinds of things? And so we've really got to understand that. You're absolutely right, David, that you've got to look at every single child in every single circumstance. And we typically do that for ourselves with our employee assistance programs, but we often don't do that for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would like to add that there is I like when we increase the complexity to kind of really underscore the importance of not assume that we know, not only that we know what the child brings into the school, given their own personal experience, that all of us and none of us experience a post-pandemic recovery before, because we never, thankfully, had a global pandemic, that we live in a very global world. So the effect of its globality, if we say, is much larger than the way that it used to be before. So you can be also burdened by how maybe other family members from different countries or other stories that we hear about different situations that are very burdensome. That's to say that none of us really know how to recover so-called well from this pandemic. We know we don't want the COVID to continue. We want the positivity rate to be low. We have benchmarks, but we really don't have a sense of how the trajectory itself of the recovery will be like, which lends itself to, Tony, to what you said before. The creativity is predicated upon really being open to something new. Mm-hmm. And then as we open ourselves to something new, somebody can come up with the new creative way of looking at it and have more courage to do things a little bit differently, even though the agenda is get muddled by other things that need to be done.
Yeah. You know, if the past is any guide, if you think of Sandy Hook, or if you think of the 1918 pandemic, or if you think about even 9/11, within a short period of time, it'll all be forgotten. And we just move on. And I was thinking in that context that actually having people still having to wear masks, separate from the argument about masks, actually is serving a function, because it is a direct reminder that we're not through it. So that even though, you know, those kids are walking and everyone's going back to class and they're in class, they've all got masks on. So that is a reminder that we are not back. And it goes back to an old tradition, which was really good for grieving, which is in some countries in the 1700s, 1800s. If a woman lost her husband, she wore mourning dress for a year and a day. So she would walk around in black, and she would have a veil. And the purpose of that was to let everyone know, I'm in mourning. Don't forget, look at me. I lost my husband. And people gave someone a year and a day at which point she would take off the mourning dress. And the purpose of that is to honor the length of time it takes to grieve and to mourn a loss. And not only are we recovering in terms of just getting the kids back into school and whatever, we're also mourning. And we're mourning a lot of people who died, and we're mourning the whole interruption that took place. And in a funny way, that mask is like, the mourner's veil, which is that maybe that will allow us to not forget so quickly. We all went through Sandy Hook, and in the moment of Sandy Hook, it felt like no one would ever forget, and something would happen. And it didn't take long before it just kind of passed into some, file. And so I think we may have an opportunity here to work longer in this process without moving into the avoidance and the denial that we so often do in our society,
Well, and I think the other thing that you point out, and I don't know, and maybe this is part of the communication and creativity, besides the masks, are there other rituals that can help people move beyond this while still honoring the loss that we've had? I think ritual is really extraordinarily important. And even just the ritual of communication. And I think Miss Kendra does that so well, of how do you feel? What's happened with you? And getting teachers to really begin to sort of take a real hard look. Is Johnny seeming okay? And if he isn't, do we have a ritualized way for him to share that he isn't?
Right. And I think, Tony, you kind of highlighting something so important that we use quite often, therapeutic ceremonies. And what the ceremony or a ritual really does, it creates a space where an encounter can happen despite the revelation of something that was very upsetting to the person, either in a war, when they come back from a war, and so forth. And I agree with you that the Miss Kendra program does give this kind of space that has its own ritual in terms of the beginning and the middle and the end, where encounter can occur, where an adult, the teacher, or another caring adult asks the student, how are you doing today? And that moment really ritualize the importance of our connection to one another, of being there completely, not only in one role. I'm only a teacher, I'm only a student, I'm a full person. And that really what allows that ritual to celebrate or to highlight.
We're about to switch into some questions and answers, but there's one in the chat box that's completely relevant to what the two of you were just talking about. So Jillian, I'm going to jump in with this one, which is Talia has a question basically pointing out that the impact of the pandemic is still having a current impact on interfering with the parents and the educators' ability to communicate with each other. So that in many schools, parents are not really welcome into the school because of the health concerns. And the result is that parents are, not in the school, and the direct kind of communication with the teacher has been reduced. And Talia was pointing out that if you're going to be asking about each individual kid and trying to assess each individual kid, obviously connecting with the parent is like critical, because the parents, of course, have a huge amount of information about it as well. So do either of you have any thoughts about, like, is this just something we have to wait until the pandemic recedes and parents can come back in? Is there something schools can do to make sure that they're communicating with parents enough? Any thoughts about this?
Well, of course, my thought is in the context of the limitation that we have, that we are hearing, which is you can come physically to the school as often and have the communication. But maybe one of the way to do that is in the context of this ritual of asking the kids how they're doing once a week. There is a circle where this discussion happen, to allow parents, should they have access to a Zoom at one time, to also participate in it and say, to have a contact with the teacher and have the teachers ask them, how are you doing, and talk about their child and their experience, make it more intimate. And it's not all the parents the way you can have a family day or a gathering, but it really makes this boundary that Talia's highlighting that has been impermeable a little bit more porous when a parent can call in. They do have computers, they all have Zooms in the class now. So that could be something that a creative teacher may and the school may be allowing, and it should be confined to a certain time where the program is running.
I think that's excellent. And, actually, you might get more parent engagement with Zoom than you would otherwise, because oftentimes parents work and, they may not be able to come to parent night at school, but they might be able to call into a Zoom.
And you wonder also about just a simple kind of questionnaire going out to every parent, just to say, is there anything we should know? What are the needs of your child? It doesn't have to be personal information, but it can be, what kind of needs do your child have academically, socially, emotionally, and to create a dialogue, at least to be able to get some information back and forth. My guess is that probably most schools are aware of this and worried about it, and at the same time are probably somewhat overwhelmed with all the other tasks that they're doing and getting the schools up and running. So I could easily see this being overlooked, not intentionally so much, but just because of the demand. So I think, I guess my advice to parents would be to don't just sit back. You want to communicate to your educators about your kids so that they can make better choices. And for the educators to see if there's some way through Zoom, questionnaire, advisories, whatever, to touch base and find out where each kid is at, because there's a lot going on. All right, so we're at our time for Jillian. Why don't you pick a question from the audience and pitch it to us?
Sure. We have a question for all panelists here. The question is it reasonable to consider proposing that need to place social workers and other trauma-informed practitioners in the schools?
I think that there should be, if there can be. So many of the school districts don't have the resources to have them in every day, but to the extent that it can happen, I know in New Haven, it made a huge difference. It made a difference in terms of the behavior of the kids, their willingness to learn and actually move forward. That was before the pandemic. I would think that it would be even more important during the pandemic.
I mean, unfortunately, the question is being pitched to three trauma warriors. So yes, I mean, I think that we are. I think I can speak for Tony as well. Really, just all of us are part of a larger movement in the country where that is going to lead to a transformation of education and the notion of what a school is. And there is no other, from my point of view, there's no other way around it. It's not, maybe it would be nice for it not to be needed, but it is needed. for too many kids, there needs to be an integration of the academic, socio-emotional, and, to be honest, toxic stress and trauma. If it's not addressed, it's eating away at the very foundations of education, and leading to, either kids trying to communicate their experience in indirect ways, either by becoming defiant and getting involved with the criminal justice system, or becoming depressed or anxious and getting hooked up into the psychiatric system, all of it eventually leading to partial disability and inability to create a successful life for too many kids. So it just is going to be, it will eventually be a requirement. We're in the first part of that. And I think everyone's thoughts and good ideas about it are really welcome at this point, because we're at an exciting time where new discoveries about how we can be helpful to kids are going to happen. Jillian?
We have another question here, and this one is, older persons died during the earlier months of the pandemic. Miss Kendra's imagery is of an older woman. And could this trigger children to wonder, why did she survive and why their elders did not? Or for those who have lent on Miss Kendra in their junior years for significant emotional support in their way of seeing their world in places of safety in their thinking, have they been fearful for Miss Kendra or of their notion of Miss Kendra or losing her to in this pandemic while it's not fully over?
We don't have good data on that in terms of specific kids worrying about Miss Kendra. Most kids feel badly for her because she lost her only child. So there's no question that they're concerned about her. I would be certain that there would be some concern of the kids about her safety. And, this is where the imaginal realm comes in, which is because Miss Kendra, unlike all of us, is an imaginary figure. They have room to kind of conjure up their own solution to that, which is what we want them to do. We want them to have the freedom to imagine it in a variety of ways, almost as a kind of, it's a support. It's imaginal support, like a transitional object or a teddy bear, whatever. These imaginal and stories are ways for children to kind of use it to support themselves. So but I would say the information I have at this point would be that for the most part, the kids who have lost somebody in life are really focused on that real person's loss, a grandmother, grandfather, for example, and view Miss Kendra as somebody who will listen to her and them and help them. So we haven't run into too many problems with it, but the Miss Kendra program is all about caring and about noticing and asking and showing compassion. So it's good no matter which way it comes from. It comes from Miss Kendra, it goes to Miss Kendra. It's something we want kids to practice and to experience.
I would say that should that question was asked within the circle, let's say by one of the kids or another person who participating, exactly that question, in the setting of the Miss Kendra spirit, the child or the person will be asked if they are worried about someone who is elderly, who may die. Because as David was saying, Miss Kendra represents this kind. We are mortal. We can get sick and die, but hope, caring, compassion, presumably can live forever. And having that kind of a dialogue where talking about those kind of fears, for whatever imagery got evoked them, be it the look of Miss Kendra or her story, it's a door to the worry of the person. And having that conversation thereafter really is what the Miss Kendra program is all about, is to create the place where we may not going to be able to resolve the illness of your elder grandparent. However, we can listen to your worries and we can support you through it. And that's what this program provides, or this opportunity provides.
Great. Thank you. Jillian?
Now that students are back in school and there's a focus on in-person learning, how can teachers engage students in a place and environment that makes students feel welcome? Are there any best practices you're seeing in classrooms as we start the school year?
Yes. So, most, not all, but most elementary schools have an equivalent of a morning meeting. Those are needed more than ever, where you establish contact with the students at the beginning of the day. So contact, and I mean whole person contact between me and you at the beginning of the day, to notice each child when they come in the classroom, and having a little morning meeting, even if it's very brief, where you go around and you eyeball each kid, you greet them, and hopefully ask a few questions to the whole class about how they're feeling and if they have any stories or anything to tell. And some of those might be better for the teacher's ear, and some they can tell the whole class. So that's essential, which is contact. And then hopefully during the day, the teachers and the school do not get on a roll where they're just worried about getting each class done, but there can be some kind of check-in by somebody during the day on how things are going. Unfortunately, the usual way is to wait till the certain kids get upset, hit each other, show upset on the recess grounds, or do something in the cafeteria, and then use that as the entrance to, oh, is there something wrong? We at the Miss Kendra program are advocating, don't wait till that happens. Be proactive about it. And an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, and a little bit of time checking in with the kids. Not just taking breaks. Sometimes people will do it. It's a very good thing to take a stretch break, a breathing break, a mindfulness break during the week. During the day. I've seen teachers use these very fun videos where in between two sections of the class, there's some really fun dancing, jumping, this kind of a thing, and that's great. But that doesn't do what's most important, is to give the opportunity of the students to communicate to an adult that's caring about what is on their mind. And so simply calming them down for a moment will not be sufficient. You need to communicate, and you want them to know that there's a availability of doing that. So the Miss Kendra program, and there's other programs like it that give a structured way of doing that during the week. And if you don't have a program like that, it's very easy, to be honest, to build that in your own creative way as a teacher. I think that's the base of everything, because if you don't set that up, you're going to be running around dealing with the emergencies. And once that starts, you become distracted. You have to ignore the other kids while you're handling the problem. They then get antsy and things begin to get out of control. You send too many people to the principal's office. The principal gets annoyed that you're sending too many people there. You get disrupted and disorganized a little bit, and the whole thing becomes very messy. And this, of course, is good classroom management and good teaching, but it's based on having relational contact between the teacher and the student.
I also wanted to maybe kind of highlight, David, in your point is that even though when the disruptive behavior show up, it is immediately labeling where the problem is. We learned in the Miss Kendra program that a lot of students who are very well behaved are not less stressed. And even though they are not becoming disruptors in the class, their ability to learn is being disrupted, not to mention the level of distress that they are mounting. So I think that, as you said, just taking the time, and more than even once a day, to check just how you're doing is such a great investment for everybody, not only for the potentially disruptive kids, but those who are very quiet and being missed and not seen because they just don't act out, they just withdraw within.
From a larger system point of view, actually, Mayor Harp initiated really an innovative approach to this called YouthStat. I don't know, Tony, do you want to just briefly mention what we did there? And it's following the same concept, really.
Right.
Sure. It basically taught a lot of the adults in the schools and in the classrooms to pay attention to what is going on with our young people. And then the adults actually throughout the school would meet. And if a child isn't performing appropriately, to reach out in a caring way to kind of restore that young person back into the classroom and operating in ways that are in the child's interest. And so it was something that we brought entire schools together, that it was based upon looking at keeping track of and statistics around who was doing what, but everyone in that school was charged with caring for that child, keeping track of what was going on with that child, and being a touch point where that child can get reeled back into performing in his or her interest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at its height, literally the city as a whole had a list of 500, 600, 700 kids that were in particular at high risk that they were tracking, including the police, including nonprofit associations and organizations, after school programs, whenever possible, to bring in the entire thing, to collect information, to be able to serve and to attend to these kids. So, it really led to a phrase that I used quite a bit about it, which is, New Haven was aspiring to be a city that cares.
Right.
Not only parents that care, not only teachers that care, but imagine a city that would care, that would actually reach out and say, we care enough about tracking and supporting individual people in ways that supports their humanity, as opposed to just simply thinking of a city as a system that's got to be managed. Obviously it's a huge project, but it was one that Mayor Harp led there, and it's still in various ways continuing at the present time. Julie, go ahead, and then we'll have one.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I just was, as I'm listening to the two of you, I cannot resist and add that this notion of keeping your hand on the pulse is already completely practiced in medicine. I mean, anybody who's been in a hospital, you know that every few hours a nurse will come, take your vital signs, regardless if you have a fever, regardless if you have high blood pressure, just to keep their hand on the pulse of your state. So what you're describing is the importance of having our hand on the pulse, on the emotional and stress level of the kids, even when it's just routine and nobody is falling apart or distressed, but it's a good practice and it communicates that somebody is watching over and cares enough. That's it.
And I just wanted to say that, like for years, people have known that a caring adult is what makes the difference in a child's life. And if you can get an entire community and all of the people around, I've heard in schools, sometimes the caring adult is the janitor, but the janitor has a little bit of training and some skills and is helpful. And it really is so important. It has so much positive energy that can actually help to grow and develop a productive child.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
You think about the bus driver,
Mhm.
and we all have stories about, terrible bus drivers that are, traumas on the bus from the bus driver who's frustrated because the kids are all running around. They can't handle it anymore. But then there's the bus drivers that, during the time, I had a client actually once who was a bus driver, and he was the best bus driver in the world. And he told me, he said, from the moment that the kids come into my bus till the moment they leave, they're safe. And that was in his mind. And that kind of energy makes all the difference. So Jillian, another question.
In meeting with teachers during training sessions, what would you say are some of the aspects of Miss Kendra they appreciate most?
One is the transformation in the relationship to their kids. I mean, I think all teachers are trying to engender a positive, respectful, guiding relationship with their kids. But they feel nervous about being a teacher. And am I authorized? I mean, how personal can I get with kids? And, that's a sensitive subject. Um, and the Miss Kendra program gives teachers authorization for a brief time, half hour a week, to kind of open things up a little bit and to hear a little bit more about the lives of the kids in their complexity than they ordinarily would be. And to give the teacher, with Miss Kendra as the kind of the model of someone who is just listening, is going to take it in. And actually, this is the subject of our next month's webinar, bearing witness to the student's lived experience. And so more and more, we've been emphasizing the role of the teacher as someone who bears witness. And it's not just listening, it's bearing a burden. I mean, to witness properly, you take on, you bear a burden in being there for somebody else. And, trauma not only creates toxic stress in the children's brain, but trauma interferes with the health of the relationship between the teacher and the student, which really is education. I mean, if you wanted to define education, it's what happens between a teacher and a student. And on the student side, it interferes with their ability to be listening and available. And on the teacher side, it leads to states of annoyance, rigidity, irritation, burnout, impatience, and some very negative attitudes that they develop around kids simply because they've been exposed to just a tremendous amount of difficulty for so long. So trauma really, really erodes the quality of that. So I would say probably the most important thing that teachers have mentioned is the kind of the green light it gives for a stronger, more whole relationship with their kids. Adar, do you want to add to that, or?
I think what I heard from teachers is that, and I think that we can relate to it as human being, is this moment where they listen to the kid and who tells what is on their mind and what is stressing them, and the teacher is able to listen and to smile or to be there as a caring adult, there is something very transformative also for the teacher, because that very moment of this encounter is really a witnessing of how the child's level of distress is coming down, which is witnessed. It's not nuanced, actually. The child comes down. And to be the caring adult who actually was able to do that, it really elevates the meaning, if you will, of being a whole teacher. Because many teachers come with that wish as well. That's what they enjoy. They enjoy kids. They enjoy being the adults in the kid's life for 8 hours a day. And I think that is something that I've heard many times as incredibly important and meaningful experience for teachers. So I suppose it also can make you feel happier as a educator.
Tony herself, you came to a number of classrooms, put on the red hat of Miss Kendra, and became Miss Kendra.
Yes.
There's actually somewhat well-known video of Mayor Harp transforming from Mayor Harp into Miss Kendra. You wanted to say something about how that felt for you?
Sure. I think the thing that surprised me was how many young people just had things that they wanted to share and obviously needed to share with an adult, and things that troubled them. And to have the opportunity to be the outlet for them to share those kinds of things was a wonderful experience. But to know as the mayor of a town that we have so many kids that just need to have a caring adult that they can say, this hurt me, is critically important.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for coming today and to joining us for the webinar. Thank you, Dr. Lubin, and thank you, Mayor Harp. Jillian's going to put on the screen. We have a webinar 1 month from now, October 26th, same time, Tuesday at 4 p.m. And it's called Bearing Witness to the Students' Lived Experiences. And we're planning to have a nice panel to be able to describe that. And I wish you all the best today for the rest of the day. And looking forward for you to use your creativity, as we've been talking about, in trying to help us all get through the pandemic, particularly the kids and the schools that we care so much about. So with that, thank you so much, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.